What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima is going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, March 1st, 2019. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. It's been a heck of a week. And it only looks like things are just going to get even more crazy and weird from this point on. But at least it's Friday, and we've got a weekend. We can unwind a little bit, look back, and take a deep breath before we plunge back in next Monday. And speaking of taking a look back, we can see the pattern forming up here. You know, back in 2003, when the U.S. wanted to invade Iraq, they came up with a bunch of lies about weapons of mass destruction. Same thing with Libya in 2011. Same thing with Syria, Assad's gassing his own people. Yemen, still involved there. Ukraine in 2014, Yanukovych is killing his own people. And now Venezuela, where they're out there saying, oh, it's a humanitarian crisis. We must intervene. Those poor Venezuelans, they're starving because of the sanctions that we put all over them. But again, that evil Maduro made us put those sanctions on him, mommy. So it's just more of the same thing that we have seen time and time again. The U.S. government and corporations covet the resources of Venezuela. The U.S. government resents that Venezuela won't do as it's told. And so it looks like war is on its way here. Story coming out of Global Research. Right now, the U.S. sanctions on Venezuela are probably worse than the Iraq sanctions before that war started. And all this talk about humanitarian aid shipments to Venezuela, they never mention how tiny a fraction of this aid is relative to the devastating damage that U.S. sanctions against Venezuela have caused. Which, you know, it's hypocritical for the United States to crush Venezuela's economy with sanctions and then come out in and say, here, we're going to give you a few crumbs. Although hidden inside the crumbs are things to support the opposition here. Now, Mike Pence, basically at a meeting of the Lima Group in Bogota, delivered this bellicose speech, basically saying, war in Venezuela is coming. There is no turning back. And the remarks were timed. All options are on the table. We have seen the same story before. Pence said, a new day is coming in Latin America, in Venezuela, and across the Western Hemisphere. There's a dead giveaway. It's not going to stop in Venezuela. Socialism is dying, and liberty, prosperity, and democracy are being reborn before our eyes. Well, okay, Mike, here's your rifle, and here's your parachute, and here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture centers. Watch your head climbing into that transport, and we're going to call Maduro and tell him you are on your way all by yourself to kick his butt. And the rest of us, we're going to sit this next one out because we, the American people, are sick and tired of being lied into these wars time and time and time again. And we know this has nothing to do with democracy and has nothing to do with humanitarian aid. It has to do with controlling Venezuela's oil, which is the largest oil reserves on the planet Earth. And again, Pence's comment about across the entire hemisphere gives it away. It's not just going to be Venezuela. And if Mike Pence is really opposed to socialism, he ought to be taking a closer look here at the United States of America because we are headed well down the road to socialism. Okay, we're going to take a phone call now. Steve Elkins, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
My dog's going crazy here, Mike.
I have that effect on dogs.
I think 2 days ago you were talking about the U.S. military, U.S. Navy being in the Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea, and our U.S. Navy.
Yes.
Evidently provoking China for a military action response. While supposedly we're supposed to be either easing up on the tariffs or maybe eliminating the tariffs and trying to find a fair trade deal with China, has there been any excuse given or any reason given for why the U.S. military is in their waters?
The U.S. military just says it's a freedom of navigation exercise, but the timing is just too cute. And it's another indicator that our government is really badly factionalized, that there's a large part of the government. In fact, we have an article that's in the talking points later on, where at this point, the U.S. government is breaking into two camps: those who want to confront Russia and China right now, and those who do not. And I think, obviously, the military is under the control of that camp that wants to provoke a military confrontation, and they don't care if the trade talks collapse.
Now, are there any laws that the United States is breaking right now by being in those waters? I mean, I would assume you have to have permission. Is like if they were in the Atlantic or the Pacific, they would have to be in international waters, and they were closer than that, they would have to have some kind of
as long as they are 12 miles away from either coastline, they're considered to be in international waters.
Okay. That's it for me, Mike. Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. But it is still clearly meant to be a provocation. Okay. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network here. And Elliott Abrams has got a really tough job. I mean, 2 weeks ago, when he was going through his, I guess, confirmation, if you will, newly elected Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, referencing Abrams' involvement in the Iran-Contra scandal, asked, "Why should we trust you?" A valid question. And he fumbled his way through that one. The only thing that saved him was the corporate media, who predictably accused Representative Omar of being an anti-Semite, because Elliott Abrams is Jewish. So earlier this week, Russian envoy Vasily Nebenzia called out Abrams in front of the UN General Assembly, noting that in the 1980s, Abrams had schemed to smuggle arms to Nicaraguan death squads disguised as humanitarian aid, and said that's exactly what he's trying to do again by forcing U.S. humanitarian aid into Venezuela. And forget all the other aid that's coming on from all the other countries. No, you will accept the U.S. aid. And don't forget, in the aid trucks that were burned at that defunct bridge, they did find construction materials for the building of barricades, something the opposition would need. Now, Venezuela's opposition leader, Juan Guaido, who's in Brazil, is now vowing he will return to Caracas despite the threat of being thrown in prison. Now, obviously, he cannot lead his opposition from Colombia, or actually he's in Brazil right now. He has to be there seen to be leading the opposition, but he did violate a court-imposed travel ban to leave Venezuela. And so now Maduro has a legitimate reason to throw him in jail, at which point the United States is going to scream, humanitarian crime or some other such situation here. And again, the lies are going on here. Guaido is this U.S. educated and presumably CIA trained opposition figure that most Venezuelans had never heard of until recently. Before he stood up in the assembly and declared himself president, only 20% of the Venezuelans had heard his name. And he's described in the corporate media as the internationally recognized president of Venezuela. And that right there is another corporate media lie. Guaido is recognized by the U.S. and some U.S. allies, but the vast majority of nations on earth continue to recognize the government of President Maduro as the legitimate authority. Now, Maduro was inaugurated on January 10th for the second time as an elected president. And that's when Washington began to crank up its regime change apparatus in the country. Apparently, they expected Maduro's opponent to win, and it didn't happen. So, Guaido is now contriving this set-piece drama over humanitarian aid, which is misleadingly being reported as blocked by the Maduro government on a single defunct border crossing. The bridge was built in 2015. It's never opened due to an ongoing dispute between the two countries. It's blocked at both ends. The whole thing was staged. for media footage of, Maduro burns the humanitarian aid trucks. Actually, video showed it was the opposition that burned the truck. And the Red Cross went public slamming these people for using the Red Cross logo without permission. Because you're not supposed to use that Red Cross symbol unless the Red Cross says, yes, it's okay, and we'll get involved and we'll help out and we'll be part of what's going on. So it was just set decoration. These trucks were just props here. Now, the U.S. is out there screaming that Venezuela's government is committing human rights abuses, and yet the United States, look at all the human rights abuses it's committing across the Middle East. First and foremost, the torture of all those Iraqis to death to find weapons of mass destruction, which turned out not to exist. Not to mention support for Saudi Arabia and their human rights violations in Yemen. Not to mention support for Israel and their human rights violations in Palestine. So once again, the United States is being incredibly hypocritical. Their double standards are on view for the world to see. Now, Maduro, sensing that this situation is going to continue to escalate, has ordered the European headquarters of the Venezuelan state oil firm PDVSA to be moved to Moscow. And they're closing the Lisbon office. And basically, the decision comes as Venezuela expands energy cooperation with Russia's oil and gas giants Gazprom and Rosneft. So it does make sense. The United States is trying to prevent Venezuela from selling their oil to any place in the U.S. or U.S. allies. So, of course, Maduro is going to turn over to the Russian sphere of influence. Down in Mexico, the Mexicans are protesting in large numbers against the U.S. war on Venezuela and the violation of Latin American independence that it would represent. Anyway, over in Bolivia, Evo Morales said the Haiti Empire is over, which is a daring statement even as the U.S. works to overthrow the government of neighboring Venezuela. Now, over in Pakistan, they have released the captured Indian pilot Abhinandan Varthaman, and he was shown on TV crossing the border back into India after he was released by Pakistani authorities. The footage shows him being walked to a heavily guarded border crossing by Pakistan officials. He's handed over peacefully to Indian forces who walk him across the frontier. Then they drive him away in a police car. Now, Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan released Abhinandan as a peace gesture. And, of course, Abhinandan received a hero's welcome when he arrived back on Indian soil today. So, hopefully, Imran Khan's gesture will get everybody to maybe take a deep breath and back off. But there's still a lot of arms and personnel gathering on that line of control. And so we'll see what's going to happen. Pakistan did threaten that there was going to be a retaliation for the attack by India, which India claimed was an attack, a retaliation for an attack by a terrorist group. Now, the terrorist group has taken credit for the attack and said, yes, we did it. Over here, look at us, we did it, our bad. But India immediately said, oh no, it's Pakistan. It's definitely Pakistan's behind all of this. So what's really going on in the back channels? And it turns out that Israel is actually a major player in this escalating conflict with Pakistan. For months, Israel has been lining itself up alongside India's nationalist BJP government in an unspoken and politically dangerous anti-Islamist coalition. And it turns out that India has become the largest weapons market for the Israeli arms trade. So if Israel would like to sell more weapons, another false flag terror attack inside India, India attacks Pakistan, the war is on, Israel is making money. Now, a lot of people are questioning some of the reports coming out about this dogfight that took place between India and Pakistan. It involved a large number of planes. But one of the reports was that India claimed one of its MiG-21 fighter jets shot down a Pakistani Air Force F-16. And a lot of people are saying, boy, that just doesn't sound right. I mean, the MiG-21 is a generation earlier. It was first used in 1959. And the F-16 has more modern equipment and systems. But military experts are saying that really it's really up to the pilot. That if you've got a really good pilot in the MiG and a not so good pilot in the F-16, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. And this is coming from Mikhail Kodoronok, that's it, military expert and retired colonel who served in the Russian Missile Defense Forces, as told to Russia Today. And just to show you how incredibly bizarre and silly all of this is getting, there was an article that came out in the Washington Examiner explaining how a nuclear war between India and Pakistan could reverse human-caused global warming. And they're saying, yes, it would be a bad thing. There'd be a horrible death toll and humanitarian crisis, but all that dust and dirt thrown up into the air, which I would like to remind everybody would be radioactive, would, reduce sunlight getting to the surface of the Earth. It would trigger a nuclear winter and global warming would be over. Well, sitting here in Hawaii, where it is unusually cold, I can tell you global warming actually is over already. And by the way, unless that dust and debris thrown into the atmosphere is white, it will absorb solar radiation to the exact same degree that it would if it was still sitting on the ground. Okay. Over in Syria, there is a growing fight over what is being called the safe zone, with the United States wanting to keep their forces there to protect the Kurds from Turkey, Turkey wanting to administer it, and now Syria and Turkey are talking about reviving a treaty that was signed back in 1998 called the Adana Agreement, in which both Syria and Turkey would agree to stay out of that Kurdish area. And to nobody's surprise, the United States is attempting to block efforts to revive the Adana Agreement because they want to stay on in there. A Syrian official is saying that it is U.S. military forces and their allies that are responsible for the humanitarian crisis at the Rukban refugee camp, and that in point of fact, American troops are preventing residents from leaving the site to go toward government-controlled areas. So that's what's going on. Anyway, he stressed that the Damascus government is prepared to take responsibility for a safe and decent return of displaced people to their hometowns. They've basically opened up these safe transit corridors for these people to use in the Rukban camp. The Americans won't let them go. The other day we were talking about this story that had come out about how the United States government had received tens of tons of gold, somewhere between 40 and 50 tons of gold from ISIS in exchange for evacuating them out of high danger areas of Syria. Well, there's been a clarification today. This is coming out of southfront.org. Apparently, it was a less than amicable deal. Apparently, it was the United States idea where they came on in and said, we know you have all this gold that you've been stealing from Syrians in Syria all this time here. Unless you give it to us, we're going to abandon you here and let the Syrian army finish you off. And that's how the deal came on down, and the gold has been flown out on U.S. helicopters along with the ISIS leadership. All right, we got to take a break here for some commercials, words from our sponsors, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here, and if you would like to support Republic Broadcasting, and folks, I'm not kidding, we really need it, the postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit or debit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. Getting on back to the international news, which mostly consists of war zones here, there is a newly proposed peace plan for Afghanistan, which suggests cutting the U.S. contingent in half immediately and withdrawing the remaining forces in 3 to 5 years. This is basically the United States leaving Afghanistan really slowly, so you don't get the impression that we lost that one along with Syria. Okay. But we did. We absolutely did. Speaking of Afghanistan, China's defense ministry is denying reports that they have a military presence in Afghanistan. They're cooperating militarily with Tajikistan, and cooperation between the two is in line with international law and related resolutions passed by the UN Security Council, said ministry spokesman Ren Guoqiang. However, Ren said there was no Chinese presence in the adjacent Wakhan corridor belonging to Afghanistan. Maybe that was going to be the propaganda to derail the withdrawal plan. All right, let's see. We're going to go back here to the phones. Tom in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I must apologize. The last time I called you, I must have gotten a dead spot, and you were going, hello, 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 and I was trying to yell and yell and yell, and you couldn't hear me. So it's not that I didn't ignore you. I just couldn't get a cell up or something here.
Well, I hear you just fine now.
Good, good. There's something that irritates me, and I don't know if it irritates a bunch of other people that are in my age group. You see, we went to Vietnam, and I was there in 1969 to 1970, and during that time, I wasn't a hero or anything like that. But I will say that we didn't lose the war there. Okay, nobody kicked us out of there when I was there. In fact, I'm sure nobody kicked us out anywhere. Everywhere we went, we won whatever battle it was. Okay? We weren't kicked out of there. So as far as us losing, the Vietnam veterans did not lose the war. When you categorically say we lost in Vietnam, that's like saying we lost in Afghanistan or Syria or any other of these places that we've been. You know, it's a direct insult to the people that were there, because when you're there, you're not kicked out. You're there because they told you to be there, and you have to defend your position and yourself while you're there. You know?
Well, so Tom, you just hit the nail on the head. First of all, there's a big difference between winning a battle and winning a war, and with the U.S. leaving Saigon with a bunch of Marines dangling underneath a helicopter, that's not a graceful exit. It wasn't the soldiers on the ground who lost the war. It was the military command and the government, because they wanted the war to drag on, basically to justify more military spending. But in the end, it was bad planning and bad policy, mostly by the Johnson administration, that lost that war. But you have to be honest, we did not win in Vietnam.
I'm just telling you, it's a slap as far as in the face of the people that were there, just for you to say that we lost. When we were there, the time that we were there, everybody was there for a year. The time we were there, we were there. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, too, is you're talking about Venezuela. Back in 1969, when I went to Vietnam, do you know how many people in the United States spoke Vietnamese? Probably not even a half of 1%. Now, as far as speaking Spanish today, I'd say 1 out of 10 people in the United States can speak Spanish. Would you agree with me or not?
I would tend to agree with you. You know, in certain areas like Los Angeles, it's probably 1 out of every 2.
Okay, well, they teach Spanish in school around in my area here, so
yes,
it's like another thing. You know, some of the words. Now, if you're going into a country and try to win the minds and spirits of the people, and you don't know the language or the customs, that's another thing that you have to worry about. We have our customs and our language is so foreign the Vietnamese, it was like, how do you win the hearts and minds and souls of these people when you can't even communicate with the people? You know?
Well, do you
It's not
remember
the same
Colson's
thing as
Law?
Venezuela, though.
Do you remember Colson's Law? This was a sign that was on the wall at Chuck Colson's office at the White House. When you've got them by the balls, their hearts and minds will follow. And that was exactly the attitude that the administration had toward fighting that war in Vietnam. Anyway, Tom, I apologize if your feelings got hurt, but we did lose that war. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And boy, the phone lines are loading up now here. We're going to start with Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
There's winners and losers and everything, and the North Vietnamese general knew they won the war is when all those guys was hanging from the helicopter. That's when they won and we've lost. You know, it's like a baseball game.
Yes.
You lose on the field, you walk off the field. If you win on the baseball field, you're all cheering your team won. You left, you know, it was a political and economical decision, I say, at that point. You know, but... You know who the real losers are, Mike? The American people for allowing this crap to go on in the first place. The winners are the oligarchs that sent you to the war in the first place.
True.
And it's been going on ever since, Mike. Vietnam, Iraq, Syria, this, that, here and around, Venezuela. When are people going to wake up? The loser are us.
Yeah, they are.
Obama
And from the point of view of the military-industrial complex, they won the Vietnam War because they made a ton of money off of it.
But Obama's kids, Bush's kids, Clinton's kids, none of them went to any of these wars. When are people going to get that? We're the losers. We're getting sent like cannon fodder over there for their economic gain, per se, you know?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's very easy to figure out what's going on now, you know, when, you know, where you have, like, you know, independent media exposing everything.
Yes.
And, I wanted to talk about India, Pakistan, Mike, but I'll call back next week and talk about that. I'll listen to some more callers.
All right, yeah,
show,
because
Mike.
we got a lot of callers on the line right now here, and we're going to switch over to Frank in North Carolina. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, that comment that you made and the little dispute you had with the caller, difference of opinion about the winning or losing of the Vietnam War, and I would agree maybe in the classical sense, it was a loss, but I think it was a great success in one way. It tore the country apart, and that seems to be what the quote-unquote elites always want to do. I mean, that's what Barack Obama's 8 years of presidency did. It ripped this country apart.
I don't think it was necessarily intentional during the Vietnam era. I mean, certainly we had COINTELPRO that was trying to pit Americans against each other, but it was targeted on the anti-war movement. Because when you're waging war against another country, you basically, you need the support of your civil population to bear the burden and hardship that war brings. Vietnam did divide the country, and in the end, it was simply that the American people simply reached the point where they weren't going to support it anymore.
Oh, it killed a lot of people, and I'm sure they wished it would have killed a whole lot more people on both sides, but I guess they could only get away with it for so long, because I believe one of the aims, one of the goals of these wars is to kill a bunch of people off. I mean, it's just one of the ways they kill the population. But what do you think would happen today if they did try and reinstate the draft? And as we discussed briefly the other day, with the young men and women, if they reinstated a mandatory service for war.
I think we would see the American people finally snap out of their torpor, and because after 17 years of war, everybody's sort of kind of gotten used to it. Yeah, there's another war, and here's another war, and everything. I think they'd snap out of that, and I think there would be a huge pushback where Americans would finally have to confront all these wars and really examine what were they fought for, what was the real reason that we have gone into all these countries, why we have our military in 39% of the countries all over the planet. And I think after that moment of self-realization, I think there would be a tremendous outrage, because that's certainly what happened in Vietnam, because prior to the draft being reinstated, most people couldn't even find Vietnam on a map. And then the draft was reinstated, and everybody, wait a minute, you're coming for my kids? No, we're not going to let this happen.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that assessment. Well, once they would have skin in the game, I think they'd be out in the streets, and not my daughter. Not my daughter, not my son. Yeah, I tend to agree. Okay, thank you.
All right, we're going to switch over to Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, this really wasn't why I called, but there's a famous book by a guy named Colonel Harry Summers, who wrote a book called On Strategy, Clausewitz in the Vietnam War, and he was a delegate to the Paris talks with the North Vietnamese at the end of the war. And he went up to one of the North Vietnamese delegates, Summers did, and said, we never lost a battle. And the Vietnamese general turned to him and says, that's true, but it's also irrelevant. But at any rate, the reason why I'm calling is, and I sent you this article, Mike, there's what the anti-Semitism thing with Labour Party in England. Right?
Oh, yes.
And some of the Labour Party people are starting to sort of fight back the way they ought to. And with all the UN stuff on Israel being found, findings of war crimes and all the stuff against the Palestinians just recently, right?
Yes.
They're saying because you see a lot of these volunteers that have gone to fight for ISIS, and they're not allowed back in the country, right?
Yes.
And so now when they're linking the war crimes to Israel, they're saying, listen, you shouldn't be allowed back in the country either if you're one of those. By the way, there's more British Jews serving in the Israeli army than there are in the British army, as there are more American Jews serving in the Israeli army than the American army. But at any rate, you shouldn't be allowed in the country either. You can, with war crimes and all that. And I thought it was great. So, just wanted to hear what you had. Did you have a chance to read that?
No, I haven't read that book. I've read von Clausewitz, his original writings, but not Summers' book. But that North Vietnamese general was absolutely correct. Your past successes and failures generally are irrelevant. And it's almost a gambler's fallacy. I'm on a winning streak, I should keep gambling. No, every time you roll the dice, it's the same odds that you might win or lose. And
you can't sever the battlefield can be severed from the political results, and that's what he was getting at. Of course, we won on the battlefield, but what does that matter? We lost politically in a huge way. So,
again, in the classical sense,
everybody else was right as well.
In the classical sense, the U.S. had to leave Vietnam as part of the Paris Peace Accords. The U.S. was supposed to pay something like $15 billion in reparations to Vietnam. The U.S. reneged on that, which is why Vietnam kept the POWs.
Yeah, there's a good story about how those relations with Vietnam got reinstated. It has to do with Ron Brown and the Clinton administration. Have you ever heard that one?
I heard some rumblings about it, but please enlighten us.
Well, Ron Brown at the time was the chairman of the Democratic Party and had just been put back in the Clinton cabinet as the Commerce Secretary.
Yes.
Of course, he was, in my opinion, assassinated like 2 years later. But it turned out that Vietnam had contributed, North Vietnam, or now Vietnam, had contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Clinton campaign and for the recognition. And one of the things that was because Ron Brown, as the bagman, head of the DNC, was being investigated. One of the things when he died, investigated over, were these illegal contributions from Vietnam in order to get, most favored nation status restored to them.
Yes,
so,
I remember that now. And I remember Ron
Mike,
Brown saying that he would not go down alone, which ultimately he didn't, but not in the way that he meant.
Yeah, he went down with a whole plane load of people.
Yes.
But Mike, did you get a chance to read that about the Labour Party and saying that the people who are serving British subjects serving in the Israeli army should not be allowed back?
Well, I've been reading about that. In fact, I think we have one in the talking points a little bit further in. Now, I don't know what the laws are for Great Britain, but I believe here in the United States of America that if you travel to a foreign country and serve in their military, it can cost you your citizenship.
Yes, and wouldn't it be great since we can now tie this terrorism charge and these war crimes to the Israeli army, now that the UN is saying that, if people like Rahm Emanuel, who did that, and Jeffrey Goldberg of National Review, and some of these people were actually held to account for their disloyalty to let's just say, their more favored loyalty to Israel than the United States.
Yeah, they should be. Well, right now we're seeing a propaganda push to basically say that this idea of dual loyalty is just another anti-Semitic canard, that it doesn't really exist, that, American Jews are loyal to America, which, again, actions speak a lot louder than words.
I just sent you another one on that about a half an hour ago. So it's off Mondo Weiss that American Jews are saying, oh, yes, there is a problem with American Jews. Some of them are saying there is a problem with dual loyalty.
Yes.
So
I posted that.
That's it for me, Mike.
Yeah, okay. Thanks a lot. I did post that. And we're going to switch on over to Al in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. A lot of interesting information just came out in the last 15 minutes. I'm going to play devil's advocate here, and I'm curious as to why you didn't ask that Vietnam vet, Tom, I believe his name was.
Yes.
What he was told, the reason he was there, because he sounded kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Disillusioned, maybe a little bit.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to take anything away from the guy, but obviously he might have been lied to, and he still believes the lies.
That very well could be the case here, and I got an email just now from saying nobody wants to be on the losing side, and I understand exactly, how that works. But again, in the classic view, the United States did not win that war, just like we never won in Korea. And that's the reality. And it's not meant to be a slap in the face of those who put on the uniform and actually did the fighting. They're as much a victim of the war as anybody else. But in the case of Vietnam, it was mismanaged from the get-go, and it dragged on too long until the point where public support for it collapsed.
Yeah, it almost seemed like a push from the military-industrial complex to really take a lot of power for themselves and to call the shots. And obviously, we can see what's happening. I mean, Eisenhower warned up this was going to happen, and I mean, look at it; it's just a mess now.
Yes.
I'm going to let you go in a sec, but what Peter was saying about these people that are not allowed home, that went to fight for ISIS. I mean, we have to remember that who created these people, number one, and number two, with all the crapola that's going on up here in Canada with Trudeau, you know what? He'll take them. He'll bring them right into this country and feed them for years. Because he needs the votes. Come on in, people. I'm sure Trudeau is probably tweeting
Canada's
it as
a beautiful
talking.
country, That's a nice place to live if you don't mind the snow and ice in the winter.
Well, there are a lot of, when you think about it, like I live in the southern part of Canada, we're actually not as far north as a lot of the United States, but but anyway, thanks. You know what? Thanks a lot, Mike. The last callers that just called in, I love you guys. Keep calling. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Same sentiment to you, and we're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to remind people what we were told, and we were told a lot of the same garbage today with all the Middle East wars and all that. We got to fight them there, otherwise we're going to have to fight them in the streets of L.A. and New York, wherever. Total garbage. You look at Vietnam today; they're a bustling country, the same communist government that we were saying were so evil at the time, and they're actually even asking us for help against China, which I don't think we should be involved in. I think we should get out of these places, stay out, We lost 58,000 American soldiers in Vietnam. I don't know, probably hundreds of thousands were wounded. Many people messed up in the head. The years after that, even today, you still see homeless people in the streets, veterans that are from the Vietnam era. You know, so I mean, this is what this cost us. And we should understand. We didn't lose a war, for instance. They didn't just conquer us. Okay, we did leave on our own, power. But by the way, the people who were hanging on to those helicopters, the war had been over already. Those were people basically being evacuated, Vietnamese that wanted to come to the United States. But the thing is this: we didn't accomplish what this government wanted to accomplish, whatever that was. Okay, they still became a communist nation, and they're a communist nation today, and they're doing very well today with communism, which is so that kicks some of the stuff about socialism can't work and all that in its teeth, because it seems to be working very well over there. So that's basically what that was about, and we should learn already and stop it when they tell us we got to fight them over there, so we don't fight them over here. Throw that away. Don't listen to that. And if you want to go into the military today, understand what you're doing before you go in. That's all I can say.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I like to go back to that essay, pamphlet. It's not quite a book, by Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler, called War is a Racket. And this is a guy who enlisted, rose through the ranks, became a major general, was in charge of Marine training, was well respected, and followed his orders. And then when he retired and took off the stars, and he sat down and he said, "This is really what's going on. We were out here fighting these wars for American corporate interests and banks, and that's really what it was all about. And we were trading the lives of all these kids to make these corporations and banks richer." And that's still going on to this very day.
Yeah, I really 100%. Mike Smedley Butler was a hero. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't know who he is today when they mention him.
Well, his name kind of got buried in the aftermath of that failed coup d'etat against Franklin Roosevelt, because he was very famous in his own day. But after he blew the whistle to Congress, the whole affair was hushed up and covered up, and he sort of became the third rail. And nobody wanted to talk about him or mention him in the media anymore. Anyway, listen, Mark, we got to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and getting back to the international news here. Apparently, over in Great Britain, they had planned to close 5 military bases. And now the Ministry of Defense is canceling the base closures due to the Skripal poisoning case. That's the excuse that they're using to basically say we're going to spend more money on the military here. And they're saying it's a clear-eyed assessment of the rapidly changing threats following the Salisbury Novichok attacks. So apparently Britain is following a 5-year plan to update 33 key military sites across Great Britain. Meanwhile, Philippine officials say that a proposal to re-examine a 1951 mutual defense treaty between Washington and Manila and territorial conflicts in the South China Sea are likely to be discussed during a visit by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana will meet a Pentagon official next month before formal talks begin on reviewing the treaty, which calls on the allies to come to each other's defense against an external attack. So already they're starting to lay the paperwork treaty grid, if you will, for a war here in the Pacific, which does not make me very happy at all. There is a report that came out of srbin.info basically predicting that there's going to be a war in the Balkans this year. And this supposedly is coming from a leak from U.S. intelligence, and of course they're putting the blame on Vladimir Putin. Oh, that evil, evil, evil Vladimir Putin here. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has come on out and said that the alliance's enlargement to the east should not be seen as a provocation against Russia, and says that the concept of spheres of influence, really, it's outdated. It should be left behind. It's just, we're trying to get more members of our club. It's like a book club or a coffee clutch. We're just welcoming more members in, and that really shouldn't be. Russia shouldn't be nervous about that at all. Meanwhile, NATO is stepping up its naval presence in the Black Sea. Now, the whole issue about NATO expanding eastward goes back to the collapse of the former Soviet Union, at which point NATO, and especially the United States, made a promise NATO would not expand any further eastward than it already was, which was basically the eastern border of Germany. And, of course, immediately proceeded to break that promise. And that's why Russia is nervous. And for Stoltenberg to come on out and make this statement shows that he knows Russia sees this as a provocation. And we all know that Russia is not going to take NATO's assurances that this is not a provocation, not with all the weapons and personnel that have been flooding into Europe over the last year. We're going to take a break for station identification, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And I forgot to mention it at the top of the show. Yes, the lovely Lady Claire will be here in hour number 3. Okay, here's a little bit of Beck's that came out of the American Conservative, and it was headlined how an anti-Semitic attack marked the end of the yellow vests. And they're basically talking about this assault on Alain Finkielkraut in Paris last weekend, and saying it marks the end of the yellow vests as a social force we could be hopeful about. Well, the violence and the anti-Semitic acts are being carried out by agent provocateurs who've infiltrated the yellow vests to carry out these actions specifically so the media could demonize and marginalize the yellow vests. I don't think they're going away. I think once the people start moving, they keep on moving. Do you realize we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the start of the Great March of Return? Every single Friday, despite all the people being killed, crippled, and wounded. And now, of course, we have the United Nations, which is calling for arrests over the actions of the IDF against those protesters, saying that they may have committed war crimes and crimes against humanity by using lethal military force against unarmed protesters in Gaza. And as a matter of fact, they're now talking about making a referral to the International Criminal Court at The Hague. And it's great that somebody is finally calling Israel out for doing what it's doing, and they're getting company, because up in Geneva, there is another organization, Euromed, that is slamming Israeli violations of Palestinian rights in Jerusalem. And they're documenting continued and excessive human rights violations committed by Israel against Palestinians just within the last month. Now, Sarah Pritchell, Euromed spokesperson, said the Israeli authorities continue their policy of restricting freedoms of the Palestinians in Jerusalem and preventing them from holding activities or events that reflect the Palestinian identity. Now, yesterday, Israeli warplanes hit Gaza, and today we're finding out Israel's justification for it. Apparently, there was an explosive balloon that was launched from Gaza, and it damaged a house. And I saw a photo of the damage. It broke a window. That was it. And of course, we don't know if the balloon was launched by an agent provocateur. And so in response, IDF fighter jets and attack helicopters struck a number of targets in a Hamas military compound. Okay, more and more is coming on out about Donald Trump's deal of the century between Israel and Palestine. And the most important thing is it does not include a Palestinian state. Now, the peace plan will propose establishing Palestinian autonomy in the Gaza Strip with political and economic links to the West Bank. The Jewish settlements will remain under Israel's jurisdiction, but will not be expanded. And if you think Israel is going to comply with that, I've got some of Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons to sell you. This thing is a total giveaway to Israel. The Palestinians aren't going to go for it either. They want their state. They were promised a state of their own, not just by the United Nations, but even by Israel itself back when Israel was created. They only want what was promised to them. Now, Netanyahu, as you're already aware, is looking at indictments for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. And apparently, the High Court rejected a last-ditch attempt by the Likud party to scupper the recommendations until after the April 9th elections. Now, the indictments recommended by Mandelblit will be subject to a hearing beforehand, and that's going to be the last possible moment where Netanyahu can avoid being charged before the elections. Meanwhile, his opponent, Gantz, is saying to Netanyahu, you should step down and fight your legal battles out of office. So that's heading up. Okay, over in Arkansas, there is a small local newspaper, the Arkansas Times, and they have been getting these letters from the state of Arkansas demanding that the newspaper sign a pledge not to boycott Israel or forfeit all state advertising. And this, of course, came out of this law that was passed in 2017 by the GOP-controlled legislature, and it requires any company entering into a contract with a public entity to certify it is not currently engaged in and agrees for the duration of the contract not to engage in a boycott of Israel. And this Arkansas Times basically ignored it because they were busy producing a newspaper. But then the University of Arkansas system began to enforce the law and said that unless they signed that anti-boycott pledge, they would not continue running advertisements for the University of Arkansas Pulaski Technical College. So the Arkansas Times looked at the law and said they had to sign the pledge. They could continue to do business without signing the pledge as long as they accepted a 20% cut on our ad rates. Well, the Arkansas Times, to their credit, is going to court on First Amendment grounds, saying it's none of the state's business what political beliefs they hold. And the Arkansas Times is saying, we have no editorial position on Israel and Palestine. We report on Arkansas. We're a local paper. And opinions about Israel-Palestine vary throughout the office, but it's all our own personal business here. And so the editor came on out and said, this law is a rabbit hole our country does not need to go down. Since when do American citizens have to pledge to act in the interest of a foreign power to do business with their own government? Since when does the state of Arkansas punish its own taxpayers in an effort to assist a foreign government with its domestic policy? And so they're going to court. And it's about time. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Americans for Peace Now, which is an American nonprofit, has launched a petition drive calling for the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, to disinvite Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from its March conference. It's a nice symbol. No way it's going to happen. Netanyahu has star power. AIPAC's going to have him up on that stage, holding up cartoon bombs and screaming about Iran and frothing at the mouth here. Looking at North Korea and the recently failed summit, Nancy Pelosi is happy that Trump walked away, and she's happy because Kim Jong-un would not agree to total denuclearization before the sanctions were removed. Remember, I said that was the impasse. Kim Jong-un wanted things to happen together in parallel. The U.S. attitude is, give us everything we want first, then maybe we'll do something nice for you. And as a matter of fact, to be accurate, North Korea had offered to shut down two of its isotope processing plants in exchange for the reduction in sanctions. Now, I understand that South Korea has just canceled a military exercise with the United States. Congressman Tom Cole also supported the president's decision to walk away from the North Korean summit, and went on to say that there's no question that America's engagement with North Korea has made the world a safer place. Since talks with the North Korean regime began, there have been no signs of nuclear testing or missile launches. Moreover, the remains of American soldiers lost during the Korean War have been repatriated and American hostages returned. This would not have happened had President Trump not engaged with the North Koreans. Well, there are other reactions out there. Senator Lindsey Graham is already out there rattling the sabers at North Korea just the day after the summit went down, and he's out there saying it's time to end the nuclear threat. Lindsey Graham apparently does not like peace, and he's ready to go to war. There's something to keep in mind, though. North Korea may have stopped missile testing, and they may have stopped building nuclear bombs. But that should not be taken to mean that they don't have nuclear bombs and the missiles with which to use them. And I hope Lindsey Graham will keep that in mind before he talks about invading North Korea. Because North Korea's missiles may not be able to reach the U.S. mainland, but they can reach Alaska, and they can reach your humble host right here. South Korea has offered to step on in and mediate between the U.S. and North Korea to try and get the talks back on track. But I'm in agreement with some of our intelligence estimates. Ultimately, Kim Jong-un isn't going to give up his nuclear arsenal. He's looking at what the U.S. is getting ready to do in Venezuela, and he knows that the U.S. plans on doing that to the entire world, and ultimately his country here. And no sooner had the second summit collapsed than this mystery group nobody's ever heard of before, the Chiolima Civil Defense, has declared itself North Korea's government in exile while denouncing the government of Kim Jong-un as an illegitimate regime. And they issued a video statement Friday. It was a video of a woman dressed in a traditional black and white hanbok. Her face was blurred out, reading the group's manifesto. So here we have already, we have a government in exile. And no doubt the United States is now going to say, we recognize this group as the legitimate government of North Korea. And they're going to push for regime change over there. How crazy it is coming. Now, I referred to this a little bit earlier in the show on a phone call. There is a meaningful debate that is starting to emerge over just what America's role in the world actually is. Now, politicians and analysts are finally admitting that long-standing mistakes have brought the United States to an uncertain moment, and they are concluding that the bipartisan consensus forged back in the 1990s, in which the United States towered over the world and, at hopefully low cost, sought to remake it in America's image, has failed and cannot be revived. Well, it's great that they're realizing that, because it has failed. But at this point, we're seeing the political system split into two camps. One camp holds the United States made a mistake by coddling China and Russia, and urges a new competition / confrontation against these great power rivals. The other camp says the United States has been too belligerent and ambitious around the world, and says it's time to enter a period of restraint rather than crusade against grand enemies and military peers. Obviously, I'm in that second camp. Back in 2014, the United States imposed a moratorium on experiments to weaponize some of the world's most lethal viruses by making them transmissible by air. And they imposed the moratorium because of the obvious concerns a laboratory mistake could spark a global pandemic. Now, anytime you're studying infectious diseases, there's a safety risk. BSL-1, BSL-2, BSL-3, and BSL-4 being the most. But these proposed experiments intended to create highly contagious flu virus that could spread among humans. And the government concluded the work should not go on. Well, apparently, the U.S. government has had a change of heart. In the past year, the U.S. government quietly green-lighted funding for two groups of researchers, one in the U.S. and the other in the Netherlands, to conduct transmission-enhancing experiments on the bird flu virus, which was the research that they were doing before the moratorium. And neither the approval nor the deliberation of judgment were announced publicly. The government confirmed them only when a reporter learned about them through non-official channels. Well, there's a reporter who's doing their actual job. Now, that's a biological weapon, and it's a biological weapon with the potential to go global. It's amazing here. Over at Boeing, they're having more problems with the KC-46 tanker. Apparently, inspection of several new aircraft by the U.S. Air Force discovered dangerous debris. They found tools that had been left behind, foreign object debris such as scraps of metal in several parts of the plane that could cause damage to the tanker's equipment over time, or worse, cut electrical wiring. And for those of you who are my age, you probably remember when the F-16 first came on out, there were a whole series of crashes that turned out to be the wiring harness during those high G turns. It was rubbing against the inner frame of the airplane and shorting out. And the U.S. lost more pilots to that wiring harness problem than it did to enemy action. Turning to the domestic political scene, everyone's still talking about Michael Cohen's stellar performance before the Congressional Committee, in which he delivered basically nothing of any real substance, other than character assassination and smears. Trump is a racist, Trump is a con man, Trump is a cheat, Trump passes gas in the White House elevator, whatever it was he was saying. But apparently, in the middle of his testimony, and remember, this guy is going to jail for 3 years for, among other things, perjury, lying to Congress. And now it's come on out, he lied again. And one of the lies that came on out was that he claimed he never wanted to work in the White House, which was basically shot down by CNN's Jake Tapper, saying there was absolutely no question that Cohen was angling for a job at the White House. Now, that's pretty minor, and I'm not really concerned about that one. But apparently, he lied also regarding the WikiLeaks dump of emails, because he testified this week that Roger Stone told Trump that he, Stone, spoke to WikiLeaks head Julian Assange, who said the dump was forthcoming. But Roger Stone has denied it. So has Julian Assange. And according to the Washington Post, in a text message, Stone said Mr. Cohen's statement simply is not true. And again, Assange denied it. And the organization had already disclosed more than 30,000 of the emails before the conversation claims he heard. So he may be in trouble for that one. He also claimed he had not defrauded a bank, and yet that's one of the crimes he pled guilty to. So apparently he's being referred to the Department of Justice for alleged perjury yet again. So he may be in jail for more than 3 years. The guy apparently can't help himself. Now, over at BBC, they're saying that Cohen might be a bigger legal headache for Trump than Mueller, saying that, he brought these checks signed by Trump to bolster his claims of a pattern of criminal and dishonest practice. Now, all of these allegations are far removed from the collusion allegations that led to the special counsel investigation and concerned Trump's businesses. They are far afield. They've got nothing to do with it. It's just gratuitous bashing and fishing expedition, and immaterial to any kind of criminal charges. What Cohen is saying is basically, Trump was lying to the public and the media. Well, I hate to disappoint all those pro-impeachment people. It's not a crime to lie to the public or the media. If it were, most of the members of that congressional committee would be serving time right next to Cohen. All right, we're coming up here on another commercial break, and we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And on the subject of Michael Cohen, and apparently he can't help himself. Apparently in his closing remarks early this week, he made this comment: if Trump loses in 2020, there will never be a peaceful transition of power. Well, I remember back in 2016, it wasn't exactly peaceful after Hillary Clinton lost. But Cohen wasn't there to provide any factual information. He was there to basically hand the Democrats ammunition on which to campaign from now until 2020. And that was his job. Now, given that neither Mueller nor Cohen have come up with anything substantive, and even Nancy Pelosi is now backing off on the impeachment talk. The House Democrats are opening an investigation into abuses of power by President Trump through his attacks on the courts, the Justice Department, the FBI, and the media. And the inquiry will include Trump's public humiliation of former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, his attacks on actions by the liberal Ninth Circuit Court, and his abuse of reporters as dishonest and enemies of the people. In other words, they're investigating his Twitter account. That's it. Well, at the risk of stating the obvious, all of Trump's opinions on Twitter are protected under that First Amendment. This is just the Democrats trying to harass the White House, harass Trump, keep him tangled up with all these investigations. It's amazing. All right, we're going to take a phone call. James in Charlotte, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I wanted to inform everyone I've now determined how the human race is going to ultimately meet its fate. It's not going to be by global warming. It's not going to be by global cooling. Hopefully, it's not going to be by nuclear war. I've determined we're going to all drown in plastic garbage. This is something that I haven't even heard it mentioned, much less discussed in any kind of rational manner, because people are so busy screaming at each other over climate change. But this is something that is destroying the environment at a horrendous rate.
It really is a problem. We were talking about microplastics being found in the gut of sea life all the way down at the bottom of the ocean in the Challenger Deep. And every time I hear this topic come on up, the first thing I want to know is, a few years ago they were talking about biodegradable plastics. What happened to that? Where did that go? I thought it was a great idea because, plastics are a problem. You drive down the road, you see them, off to the side of the road. It's going into the landfill. And plastics that would, after, say, a year, basically decompose back to organic compounds sounds like a really good solution. And I don't know why that idea went away. Was it just the corporations didn't want to spend the money? And the EPA just said, well, it's not that big a deal anymore.
I've got kind of an idea of what happened. A good friend of mine orders a lot of pet food. She's got a menagerie in her home. Actually, she's got a small farm with quite a number of animals, and she orders a lot of different types of pet food. to be delivered. And one of the companies a couple of years ago decided they were going to put all of their packaging in biodegradable rather than styrofoam and all kinds of other stuff. It was all going to be biodegradable.
Yes.
But then later they came out with a statement that they were rescinding that. They weren't. They decided, no, we've got another corporate decision that we can't do it. We're going back to the petrochemicals, the styrofoam, and the other stuff. And I've got an idea that they got hammered by the oil lobby.
It may well be. It may well be. Now, when I was a kid growing up in farming country, all of the feed that we got came in cloth sacks. And in the larger sacks, they would actually have patterns for children's clothing. So when you were done feeding the animals, you could actually cut this cloth up and take it to a sewing machine and make a little frock for your little kinter. And I thought that was a pretty cool idea of repurposing. But I think it's just corporate greed here. So if you want to point at a villain for a while the environment is being destroyed, it's corporate greed. And that, of course, is why we were all told the government, and especially the Environmental Protection Agency, was going to make sure the corporations weren't destroying our environment in their quest for more money. And obviously that is an area in which the government has been a total failure. Anyway, listen, James, thank you for the phone call. We've got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Representative Ilhan Omar is calling for the overthrow, or is calling the overthrow of dictator Trump inevitable. She actually tweeted out a call for the overthrow of the duly elected American president. Do you even recognize America anymore? Apparently, Omar doesn't. And it's interesting. A lot of the stuff she says, I'm in agreement with. This one, again, is way over the line. Mueller's report is about to be made public. Leaks are saying there's nothing in it. Michael Cohen failed to hand his Democratic scriptwriters anything that they could use, but impeachment is inevitable. Nancy Pelosi's already backing off that, saying that no, because they don't want to go for an impeachment and fail, because then that works against them in 2020. Now, the New York Times is reporting that Trump ordered his chief of staff to grant his son-in-law and advisor, Jared Kushner, a top-secret security clearance. And senior administration officials were troubled by the decision. And White House Chief of Staff John Kelly wrote an internal memo how he'd been ordered to give Kushner the top-secret clearance. Now, I actually have to admit, I don't know the exact mechanism, whether the president has that authority or not. But I would presume that barring something in Kushner's background that would work against that it should just go on through. I mean, ultimately, when a security clearance is being granted, somebody in higher authority grants it. It's not like you just walk up to a little window in an office and you fill out an application and say, I'd like to have a top secret clearance. It doesn't work that way. Somebody higher up says, we need to give this person a top secret clearance. Then there should be the usual background checks. Now, if those background checks were waived and skipped, then it's an issue. If the checks were properly done and Kushner got his top secret clearance through the proper procedure, then the New York Times is just trying to make another mountain out of a molehill. The Department of Justice has announced they are, in fact, going to reopen their investigation into just how it is that Jeffrey Epstein got such a light sentence on his child sex trafficking convictions. And this, of course, could prove to be embarrassing for the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation. However, it potentially could be embarrassing for Trump as well. So we'll see what's going to happen with that. Bill de Blasio's wife, Shirlane McRae, cannot explain where $850 million given to the mental health program she champions has gone. And in the 3 years it's been running, organizers at Thrive New York City have largely failed to keep records of the initiative's achievements, and data that it has been collected showing it lagging well behind its targets. And they don't know where all this taxpayer money went, or where most of it went. And now the program has been granted an even bigger budget going forward. Okay, Andrew McCabe is still out there. He's pushing his new book. And basically, in his book, he's saying that James Comey's decision to hold a press conference to announce no charges against Hillary Clinton worked to erode the credibility of the FBI. Yes, it certainly did. And, of course, McCabe was fired from his post as deputy director of the FBI after it was revealed that he'd lied to the Justice Department multiple times. Hillary was being criticized for mishandling McCabe was criticized for mishandling the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server, with some evidence even suggesting he'd been working on an insurance policy with other members of the FBI in the event Trump actually won the 2016 election. So they're all dirty and they're all crooked here. Comey was considered one of the worst FBI directors in history, but this revelation is a stab in the back from somebody that Comey had considered a trusted ally, and it cements Comey's legacy in a very bad way. And the FBI's image has eroded. They're actually having trouble recruiting new agents. There's been a sharp decline in the number of applicants for special agent positions, which are long considered among the most prestigious in American law enforcement. From a peak of 68,000 applications in 2009, it has dropped to just 11,000 in 2018. Now, I remember growing up as a kid, seeing all the propaganda on TV, the FBI, a Quinn Martin production, or the FBI story starring Jimmy Stewart, which was actually puppet directed by J. Edgar Hoover himself. And back then, I believed it all. I thought the FBI were a swell bunch of guys, until I got my taste of them back during the Vince Foster situation, and learned that the FBI are basically the equivalent of a modern Gestapo. They are there to enforce the will of whoever's in power. Cover-ups, assassinations, wreck the careers of people who get in the way. As you know, there is a push coming from the Democrats to get rid of the Electoral College, or at least to bypass it. To get rid of it would take a constitutional amendment. They're not going to go that route. They know they couldn't get through that. So what they're doing is they're going to all these states to get them to sign an agreement where they will pool their electoral votes and give them to whoever wins the popular vote as a whole. That's how they're going to bypass the Electoral College. The Washington Post is saying that the Democrats may be committing electoral suicide this way, because they're misinterpreting their mandate and overestimating the popularity of their agenda. And, of course, they're pushing this identity politics. They're breaking people into smaller and smaller groups, the different genders, the blacks, Hispanics, Antifa, and they're going to each one and saying, we're your friend. Vote for us. We'll take care of you against all these other groups. Now, getting on back to the Electoral College, the former governor of Maine, Paul LePage, is saying that getting rid of the Electoral College, or bypassing it, as the Democrats are trying to do, would basically leave white people forgotten, as they wouldn't get anything to say. Because you're going to see the popular vote won and lost in these major states like California, Texas, and Florida. And what's the demographics there? Illegal immigrants who are voting, refugees, minority groups. And yeah, the hereditary, multi-generational Americans are being sidelined in our own country. Getting on back to that identity politics, every time the Democrats create a new victim group there, the enemy is always the Republican, white, heterosexual male. We're being blamed for everything that's going on in. Kamala Harris is going all in for identity politics. And without identity politics, the Democratic Party would have no reason to exist at all. They've run out of any real ideas long ago. All right. Over at the Supreme Court, word is now starting to leak out that Justice Clarence Thomas may retire before the end of Donald Trump's term. And he's 70 years old, and the reason for doing that is the concern that Trump is going to lose in 2020, and that there will be a Democratic president and, worse, a Democratic Senate. And so by Thomas retiring now, Trump gets to put another conservative on the bench, and we'll have another Kavanaugh-esque circus to have to sit through over there in the Senate. And apparently Ruth Bader Ginsburg is back on the bench. Boy, you gotta applaud her for her tenacity. Here's an article from the original antiwar.com. Do members of Congress take too many private trips to Israel with AIPAC? And it basically goes through an analysis of gift travel filings made to the U.S. House of Representatives Office of the Clerk, and it shows Israel is far and away the top foreign destination. House of Representatives members made nearly 1,400 trips to Israel out of a total of 2,500 visits to other countries. So Israel takes them on over there and wines and dines them and propagandizes them, and who knows, maybe gets blackmail information on them. More than 680 stores closed today. The retail apocalypse is ripping through Tesla, JCPenney, Gap, Victoria's Secret. And Tesla is closing 378 of their car showrooms. They are now going to focus on an online-only sales model, which they probably got the inspiration for that from Carvana. In other words, you will buy the Tesla online, and it will be delivered to you. Heineken USA has cut 15% of their workforce, and they're not the only ones. Beer companies like Anheuser-Busch, Miller Coors, Constellation Brands, and Pabst Brewing are making significant cuts to their respective workforces in response to slowing sales. The economy is so bad, people can't even afford to buy beer. Over in Ohio, 10 of the Sonic drive-ins were taken over by this corporation, which promptly announced pay cuts. And at that point, staff at 3 of the restaurants walked off the job en masse. And they tell us the economy is booming. That's what Mike Pence said the other day here. Okay, now, since we're coming up to the top of the hour and the lovely Lady Claire, I'm going to skip on down to get our daily dose of human-caused global warming. In South Lake Tahoe, California, crews were plowing the snow-covered streets and literally bumped into a car completely buried under a massive mound of snow. And it's good that they did, because inside was a 48-year-old woman who'd been trapped there for 5 hours. And if they hadn't stumbled across the car with the snowplow, she probably would have died from exposure here. Over in Wisconsin, they can't keep snowblowers in the stores. As soon as they get them off the truck, they're out that front door. So business is good over there. Interesting little article that came out in the LA Times, a February to remember. It never got to 70 degrees in all of February in Los Angeles. And it's talking about how all these places of business who don't have heating systems, they're having to get space heaters, portable heaters. And restaurants are telling their waiters and hostesses to wear warmer clothing, even in restaurants where skimpy attire is kind of the attraction there. And over at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, which is going on right now, they're going after the Green New Deal. and saying they want to take away your hamburgers like Stalin did. And apparently hamburgers are the latest battlefield in the U.S. culture and political wars. The idea being that cow flatulence is contributing to human-caused global warming. And no, it isn't. We are in a period of global cooling, despite increasing CO2. Let's take a quick phone call from Mike in, I think it's Montana. Aloha, welcome to the show.
Minnesota.
It's Minnesota. Okay. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you. I want to pick up on your previous caller's plastics issues there. I guess I recently found out that you could use corn to make biodegradable plastic.
Yes.
And that kind of hit me right between the eyes. I think the only way that we're ever going to get this under control is to tax companies that continue to use non-biodegradable packaging.
Well, that would be definitely the way to do that. Or on contrary, offer a tax credit to companies that use biodegradable packaging, but you have to have the political will to do it, and our federal government does not. Now, a lot of states are starting to tackle the situation. Over on Kauai, plastic grocery bags are now banned, and they've gone back to the old-fashioned biodegradable paper bags, which are actually kind of good because they're stiff and they stand up and they're easier to get things in and out of anyway. Here on Oahu, they're pushing for people to use reusable shopping bags. If you go into the supermarket and you don't have your own reusable shopping bags, they now charge you 15 cents for every shopping bag they have to provide to you. And most of those are now paper.
That's great. That's great. But the bottom line is essentially, I guess it would take a government body to stipulate to anybody that's bringing product into a state or making product in a state that your packaging must be biodegradable. And, taxes big time on them till they get it that way, and tax credits for those who are moving forward up to a point. But the bottom line is you're getting everybody to change.
There's another idea that they should consider. As you know, in many states, when you buy a bottled beverage, for example, there's an added charge for the bottle. And in theory, if you take it back to a recycling center, you get that money back. And they had that same system when I was a kid. It was called the deposit, where when you'd buy a bottle of Coca-Cola or something, there'd be a few cents deposit on the bottle, and you'd take the bottle back to get the 3 cents. And back then, 3 cents was a lot of money. Today, the few pennies that they have as part of that program aren't enough to make it worthwhile for people to save those plastic bottles and glass bottles and take them down to the recycling centers. I think they should ramp that up, make it at least a quarter. And then it's going to be worthwhile, if not for the adults, for the kids to say, hey, let me grab all this stuff and take it to the recycling center. Okay? Hello? I guess we lost Mike. All righty. We're coming up here on another commercial break. And when we come on back, we're going to skip on back to the economic news. I had a lot of talking points today, but we're about 10 minutes away from the lovely Lady Claire joining us. So we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, you have probably seen on TV commercials for all these various apps that will search through things like car rentals or hotel rooms to get you the lowest price for the same room. And it sounds like a really good idea, and it was. But apparently, these corporations are starting to kind of fight back, and they're writing their own software to basically keep an eye on each other's pricing and set their pricing to be the same. And so the gap between the different prices you're going to get on those apps is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And needless to say, it's all about getting more money from you, no matter what technology you're trying to use. The average new car payment is now $545 per month. And that is a lot of money. Meanwhile, and this is significant, credit card transaction volumes have decelerated sharply in recent months, which is supporting the latest data on retail sales. Credit card interest rates are at a 2-decade high, and that's probably one reason people don't want to use the plastic anymore. In fact, it's a very good reason not to use the plastic anymore. But retail sales are slowing down. We were talking about retail Mageddon a little bit earlier. The American people are out of money. All of our money has been taken and put into the war machine or given to the refugees and the illegal immigrants or Israel. We're being bled dry. Now, there's this other article, this came out of Zero Hedge, and it's talking about a phenomenon known as the long wave social economic cycle. And this is a cycle that nations and economies go through, and it lasts many, many, many years, decades in fact. And basically says we are now entering the winter part of the cycle. And it's basically a disintegrative phase where you have a souring social mood, a loss of purchasing power, stagnating wages, rising inequality, devaluing currencies, rising debt, political polarization, and elite disunity are all manifestations of this phase, and by golly, it fits it to a T with what we're seeing before us right now. Over at BRICS, they are developing a new joint payment system called BRICS Pay, and it's their own special online wallet to integrate the payment systems of its 5 member states in order to cut dependence on the United States. So the de-dollarization of the world is continuing. Now, earlier, the corporate media was reporting that Air Force General Terrence O'Shaughnessy, who is the commander of NORTHCOM, said there was no military threat along the southern border. It turns out that was a little bit less than accurate. What he actually told the Senate committee, looking at the proposed barriers, was that there is a threat and barriers along that border could reduce it, but the big threats were Russia and China, and that our defense money was better spent there. Okay, there's our music. We're going to take a station break. When we come on back, the lovely Lady Claire will be with us. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on YouTube, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire. As always, hour number 3 on Friday here. But before we go to Lady Claire here, I have to say, America's corporate media has become totally useless, because during the station break, I was watching the Fox News feed, and with all that's going on with India and Pakistan and Venezuela and the rest of it, the stories they were running was how firefighters had managed to rescue an overweight rat trapped in a manhole cover. And this was followed by a story where the 68-year-old grandmother had accidentally floated out to sea on a chunk of ice and needed to be rescued. Okay. Anyway, so what is your first story?
Well, the first story has to do with education in our country, or what passes for it. And apparently, police officers have been accused of child torture after some footage emerges of officers shoving and screaming at kids as part of a prison-inspired program to scare them into not committing
Oh, that's the Scared
crimes.
Straight program.
Yeah, it's very similar. And it's they were South Carolina sheriffs violently shoving and screaming at kids. And the video was shot by the Charlotte Observer, shows children and teens being disciplined, if that's the word for it, by officers from the Chester County Sheriff's Office. The program is called Project Storm and is aimed at high-risk youth and involves parents sending their kids to prison for a weekend to teach them a lesson.
Now, the original Scared
Holy
Straight
crud.
program was nowhere near this radical.
Yeah.
Basically, kids who were considered high risk would be taken into a prison
Yeah.
where they would talk with the convicted prisoners. You know, they'd get volunteers from the prison population to say, do you want to talk to these kids, and say, don't make the mistakes I did. And there's always going to be a large number of people said, yes, let's do this. And it actually did work. This, you know, sending these kids to prison for a weekend to get assaulted by the prison guards.
No, the sheriffs. They were not
sheriffs. Okay.
employees of the prison. Some of the kids who were put in this program were as young as 8 and treated like real criminals in an attempt to help curb unruly behavior. You know, Mike, if you and I had had a kid and by maybe junior high or high school this behavior was happening, I would have to say we would be failed parents.
Absolutely.
Oh, you know, and it bothers me that both the parents and police apparently believe that the only thing that will turn a child around is absolute wild-eyed, heart-pounding fear and being treated roughly.
Well, there's a problem with that because when you're using fear to coerce, you know, moral behavior instead of morality to lead to moral behavior, when the fear goes away, the bad behavior comes back, and fear always goes away. You can't sustain fear for that long. And again, with this idea of failed parents, it's not entirely the parents' fault.
I agree.
It's the fault of our pop culture. It's the fault of the fact that most households now, both parents have to work and the kids are left unattended to basically just watch TV and get their heads filled with pop culture. And they're not getting any guidance in their upbringing.
And my question here is, why do incidents where kids are acting out in this way never seem to happen to the private schools, at the Kumans, to the Montessori schools or the Waldorf schools? And I think the answer is the teachers who were chosen to teach in those programs engage the kids, who diagnose and reach out to whatever level of understanding the kid has, and moving forward from there. Now, I know that here in the islands, the Kumon schools have an excellent reputation for turning kids' behavior and schoolwork around. When I see families succeed, I see environments where kids are given love, structure, and a you can do it attitude. I mean, case in point, you know, my brother and sister-in-law, two very lovely young ladies, both high-end professionals and good family people also. But what I think is the greatest murderer, if you will, of education and future potential universally is low expectations of a kid. And that is a really horrible thing to do.
You're absolutely right there. And that is unfortunately one of the hallmarks of Common Core. And, you know, all these stories over the years that we have covered where educational districts are saying, well, we're not going to issue grades anymore because it makes the underachievers feel bad. Well, yeah, that's what's supposed to happen. That's how you build motivation to accept. But if you don't have an incentive for kids to excel, to be moral, to do well for themselves, they're not going to do it. Very few kids have a natural instinct to say, we're going to do that. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network, and we got a couple of callers on the line.
Oh, good.
Starting with Keith Rogers. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I thought I'd enhance you guys a little bit of information here afternoon there, Claire, too. I don't know if you guys read that story out of the Miami Herald that the state of Florida got PO'd about, but they exposed that sheriff's fight club down there.
Oh, yes. That was awful.
Yeah, but you know what? We at RBN here, we kind of like to research things, and the stated goal of that was to harden those boys off. And, of course, they're what do you call it? They're sodomized in jail and they're like that, and it's to keep them on the inside. Well, I did some research there, and New Jersey's doing it, New Mexico's doing it, all ran by the sheriff's offices.
That's pretty ugly.
It just you know, it just tells you, Mike. The fact is that crime pays for the state.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, there's no
and
question.
For the private prison industries.
Yeah.
Again, they're taking rehabilitation, and they've turned it into another money-making scam.
Yeah. And it's like this, I hate to say it, when I hear Trump talking about all the drugs coming across Mexico's border and stuff, we still have the DHS Sentry Members program. These guys are vetted, and they're always arrested with millions in meth and cocaine. The ATF arms to Fast and Furious. I mean, it's all facilitated by the same government that is supposed to be fighting this alleged war on drugs, a war on terror, whatever. It's all the same government doing the same thing.
Well, it's the war on the competition's drugs. You know, we had an article that came out, I think it was last week, where the U.S. government has clearly partnered with the Sinaloa cartel, which was the cartel getting all these Fast and Furious guns. And the war on drugs is directed against every other cartel except Sinaloa.
So there you have it.
That's pathetic.
Yeah, we agree.
All right, well, I just want to share that with you guys.
Okay.
Well,
you have a good weekend, okay?
You too.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch over to Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, you're talking about that Scared Straight program. Well, let me tell you a little story about a young fella back in 1977, I think it was. 1976, 1977. I remember the Scared Straight program. It was actually televised. For those of you who aren't familiar, it was actually televised as I was growing up in the great city of Springfield, Massachusetts, living up there on Westford Avenue, halfway between Springfield and AIT College, and going to Kiley Junior High School. And I was back then what today you would be calling a gangbanger.
Okay.
And I was getting all kinds of trouble. And I remember Mama sitting me down in front of me, telling me, "You're going to watch this, and I hope it teaches you something." And you know what? It had absolutely no effect on me. Why? Because I was already gangbanging. Fear was not a thing for me. Fear was absolutely not a thing for me. What they're doing now by taking these children into, I was watching the little, these teenagers were going in there to the prisons, but they weren't going in for a week. They were going in for a day, and, the guys weren't screaming. The inmates weren't screaming. They weren't hollering. They were just talking very calmly and relaxed, these boys and girls. And, it really didn't have much of an effect, and I don't think it was really very effective back then. Now they're sending them in for, did I understand correctly, a week?
A weekend.
You guys are trying
a weekend.
A weekend? And what are you trying to traumatize the child? You want to talk about desensitization. This is sick. This borders on sedition. Sadistic, not sedition, sadistic.
Right.
Okay? This cannot be allowed, and the parents that allowed their children to undergo this, shame on the parents.
Yeah.
This, in my opinion, is child abuse. This is not how you reach out to a child in trouble.
Yeah. Art, can I ask a question here? What
Yes, ma'am.
moment caused you to turn your life away from the gangs? What happened to you?
I was almost killed.
Oh,
and it scared the jeebies out of me. That's scared. When you're standing there and you're laying there and you are dying, that is a moment that never leaves your mind. You never forget about it, ever. That's what changed me. Laying there, dying.
Oh, wow.
Well, I'm glad you didn't die.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that with us.
Well, that's to be a given.
I didn't either, because I sure would have missed out on an awful lot. But thank you for sharing that story and for giving me a chance to share my personal experience with that particular program.
Well, bless you.
Yeah.
Thanks for calling in, Art.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And, all right, the phone lines are open again. So what is your next story?
The next story is that Canada is going to allow the extradition of the Huawei CFO. Huawei. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
It just configures strangely between my eyes and my mouth.
Well, you should see it in the Chinese.
I bet.
Okay.
Now, this is supposed to be a landmark decision. The Department of Justice in Ottawa has ruled that extradition proceedings against Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou, who was arrested on the same day that President Trump and President Xi struck their trade truce in Buenos Aires, will proceed. Now, whether or not she will face trial in the U.S. must still be determined by a Canadian court. And it's a process that could take months or even years, but the fact that her extradition is moving forward is a big moment in this case. And it's captivated investors and elicited threats of retribution against both Ottawa and Beijing.
No, it's against Ottawa from Beijing.
From Beijing, yes. Meng is wanted in the U.S. on charges of fraud and sanctions violations for her alleged role in deceiving HSBC and other banks into processing transactions for Huawei that were purportedly linked to Iran. A U.S. prosecutor filed roughly a dozen charges against Meng and Huawei in January, as well as a formal request for her extradition, according to the BBC. Mike, I'm sorry, the timing absolutely bit here. Okay?
Well, again, as I was saying earlier in the show, our establishment has come to realize that the plan for the United States to simply rule the world has failed.
Yeah.
That they're not going to get it back on track. And now the government has split into two camps. And one camp is it's time to confront Russia and China. The other camp is saying, look, we've been way too belligerent and too aggressive, and it's time to pull back and try and calm things down. Trump, I think, is in the calm things down camp. And whoever ordered the arrest of this CFO is in the let's confront China. And it also explains why at the same time we're having trade talks with China, the Navy sails ships through the Taiwan Strait, which is obviously going to annoy China.
Oh, heck yes.
We're seeing a government that is badly split and at war with itself here.
Yeah. And that's never good.
No,
that
it's not
is never good. A few more situations regarding Venezuela and Maduro. Now, what Trump is doing, he is going to be expelling dozens of Maduro loyalists from the U.S. And the administration says that they're expelling dozens of officials loyal to Venezuelan strongman Nicolás Maduro. Not
strong man. Strong man.
Yes, terrible.
Yes.
From the U.S., and this was announced just today. And they're saying Maduro supporters that abuse or violate human rights.
I think you need to move your chair closer.
I think I do.
Yes.
Folks, I've got my glasses on, and I apologize. Older eye syndrome. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Thank you, dear.
All right.
Okay, thank you. That will help. I have such a sweet husband. Apparently, Maduro supporters that abuse or violate human rights, steal from the Venezuelan people, or undermine Venezuela's democracy are not welcome in the U.S. And of course,
if anybody is going to abuse and violate human rights and steal from the Venezuelan people and undermine Venezuelan democracy, it'll be the United States of America.
Yeah. And of course, there's no question as to who would have put this together, thought it up, and said it. Yep, that came from Special Envoy Elliot Abrams. And that's what he was telling reporters at the State Department. Neither are there family members who enjoy a privileged lifestyle at the expense of liberty and prosperity of millions of Venezuelans. Now, forgive me, Mike, but the optics on this look just officially horrible.
Yes.
Now, first...
It's childish.
Yeah, completely. And, well, I said churlish and infantile. First of all, if these people who are either related to or supported Maduro go home, if they can make it home, they're going to be looking at a probable hail of bullets against them by either U.S. soldiers, special ops, or mercs.
Okay, there's also another little wrinkle that you need to look at here.
All right.
Okay. Basically, what it is the Trump administration has gone to these Venezuelans who are living in Florida, some of whom used to work in the government, and asked them to support Guido.
Yeah. Okay.
And when they said no, then by default, obviously they're supporters of Maduro, and they are the enemy.
They become the enemy of the state.
They become the enemy, and we're going to kick you out of the country.
Yeah. And then you have the following companion piece, also from freerepublic.com. Trump sanctions top Maduro's military. And the article goes on to state we are sanctioning members of Maduro's security forces in response to the reprehensible violence, tragic deaths, and unconscionable torching of food and medicine destined for sick and starving Venezuelans.
Now, remember, okay,
Hello.
first of all, the
Yeah.
video came on out showing it was members of the opposition that burned that aid convoy on the Colombian side of the border.
Right.
And that bridge has never been used. It was built in 2015, but because of disagreements between Venezuela and Colombia, it's never been open for traffic. It's blockaded at both ends. The whole thing was a setup. It's just more Assad's sarin gas or Saddam's nuclear weapons, and now it's Maduro blocking the humanitarian aid. How many more times do you have to be lied to before you're ready to stand up and say, you guys are all full of it, and I am not listening to you anymore?
Yeah. The new Treasury blacklist includes a major general with the Venezuelan National Guard, 3 senior officials responsible for Venezuela's internal defense, and a colonel in the state national police force. The U.S. also sanctioned a commander of the FAES, which is a special police squad known for their violent role in suppressing dissent from Maduro's political opponents, according to the Treasury Department.
Well, that's another lie. If they were violently suppressing Maduro's opponents, Guido would not be alive.
Nope, probably not. And apparently, Pence has threatened war in Venezuela at the Colombia summit. I think you touched on this a little
here's
bit
your
earlier.
rifle.
Yeah, you know. And apparently there are reports that the U.S. military has escalated its war plans. Now, CNN has reported that the U.S. military has flown an increased number of reconnaissance flights in international space off the coast of Venezuela during the last several days to gather intelligence for classified information in possible, I would say, definite preparation for a military intervention.
Which means they are going to come in from the coast of the Caribbean.
Yeah. And on Saturday, Puerto Rican Governor Ricardo Rossello reported that the Venezuelan military threatened to open fire on an American ship that entered Venezuelan territorial waters without permission.
Well, you're not supposed to do that.
No,
Enter somebody else's water without permission. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Claire, you wanted to talk about Venezuela some more.
Yeah, I think that the plans for an invasion have been cleared, stamped by Trump, because right now he and the people around him are desperately trying to deflect American attention, both from the difficulties that Kim and Trump had at the summit in Hanoi, and just the slam that Cohen made against Trump in his testimony. And
well, I don't think Cohen's testimony had anything to do with it because they were talking Venezuela before that came down.
I know.
But they certainly want to distract from the fact that we did not win in Syria.
Yes.
And now we're pulling out of Afghanistan, albeit slowly.
Yes.
Hoping that nobody will notice that we're having to leave Afghanistan.
Right.
You know, not as rapidly as the Soviets had to. But we're leaving Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. And I have a feeling that all of this is going to accelerate the pace and the timing. If you were a bookie in Vegas and you were putting odds on when the U.S. would actually start a physical invasion, when would you think? What would the odds be, Mike?
Well, I would say almost imminently, and the only reason I can think of for an American warship to breach Venezuela's territorial waters is they were hoping that Venezuela would fire on it, and then they would have the excuse to go on. And so I would say it's going to happen. One sense I'm getting right now is as the American people become aware of what the U.S. government is really doing with all these wars, as popular support for all these wars collapses, as the world basically turns against the United States' hegemonic ambitions. I think they're trying to accelerate the plan. Their goal was to have World War III really spread out so nobody would realize it was a world war. And now
that's not going to happen.
They're going to start going. And one of the things that Mike Pence was saying when he was talking about we're going into Venezuela is he talked about, we're going to bring democracy to the Western Hemisphere and, get rid of socialism and everything. And that's the giveaway that it's not going to stop with Venezuela.
No, I'm afraid that it is not. I agree with you. There was a marvelous article in globalresearch.ca And the title is Who Are the Brutal Dictators? And it went on to say that Presidents Assad, Maduro are not the brutal dictators. Unfortunately, it's the United States.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
I mean, Assad and Maduro were elected.
Right.
Okay, and they have been reelected. Obviously, the people of their country think they're doing a really good job. Maduro, in his last election, had international observers, including Jimmy Carter, who declared it one of the best election systems on earth. And in contrast, of course, Carter says that the U.S. election system is one of the worst.
Yeah.
And he's absolutely accurate about that. And, every time the United States goes into a country, it's always, humanitarian needs. We're bringing them democracy. We've never brought democracy to another country.
No.
We've always imposed a brutal dictatorship. We did it with Iran in 1953 with the Shah of Iran. We did it in Chile in 1973 with Pinochet. And that's what's really going on. The United States does not like democracy. That's why they've basically compromised our own election system. Democracy gets in the way of imperial ambition.
I agree. And Mike, I've got to tell you what really irks me, and this is from Iraq to Afghanistan to Yemen, is the U.S. government's willing to be involved with what are beyond, any description, war crimes.
Yes.
And it doesn't seem... I have to wonder if the people in those planning rooms have had their conscience surgically removed.
Well, obviously, to reach that level of power, you can't think that way. You get to those positions of power by going along with what the other people in the positions of power, especially above you, want to have done. And probably very early on in your life, you make that decision. What we're doing is morally indefensible and reprehensible, but it's absolutely necessary if we're going to accomplish the agenda. And it probably, is why we find so many sociopathic personalities in these positions, where they are simply oblivious to the pain and suffering that their actions cause to everybody else. It's all about, getting control of the oil, making sure it's sold for the dollar, making sure that all these countries do what the United States says to do. And from the point of view of the United States, they don't have a choice because the economy is in serious trouble. Our manufacturing, despite Trump's tariffs, it's still in trouble. And nobody wants our agricultural exports because of the GMO. And again, the tariffs have slammed that even worse. So from the point of view of the United States, the only way to get out of this economic mess that it's in is to basically plunder the rest of the planet in order to give it to the bankers. And that to them appears to be a more attractive solution than simply declaring the private central bank be shut down and nationalized. It's all about money and its corrupting influence.
And power.
The love of money is the root of all evil.
I agree. But Mike, do you think, looking at sort of the grand picture as you tend to do, you have mentioned to me that the only way this can end is either with a world war or the collapse of the U.S. Do you still
At this point, that's what it looks like. We've got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And before we get back to the lovely Lady Claire, we've got a couple of callers waiting on the line, starting with the White Rose in Colorado. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, folks. Thanks for taking my call. For conversation purposes, my name is Greg.
Greg.
Okay.
Yeah. So Mike, Cohen did make one statement in his testimony that is very important. He did say that Trump never specifically told him to lie.
Yes.
And I would add to that that nobody ever in the history of the British Accredited Registry of Law Merchantry ever had to tell their lawyer to lie, because that is understood. All guilty people know that their lawyer is going to lie for them. Okay?
Yes.
Second point on that, British Accredited Registry, under the bar attorney lawyers are all members of the Lawyers Guild International, a self-avowed communist organization. So my comments to Claire on spirituality, I don't know if she had a chance to check out that website, abundanthope.net, to go look for those spiritual books at the top of the page.
No, I hadn't forwarded that to her yet. I was going to do that this weekend.
Oh.
Okay.
We've had house guests. I'm sorry.
We've got house guests. We had choir rehearsal last night.
Yeah.
And, I mean, running what really happened is like a 12 to 14 hour a day job.
Yep.
More important than that is, though, please check out my website and scroll down on the front page to my testimony about what happened to me at 12 midnight on July 5th, 1984. After being stricken by, I was attacked by mosquitoes working in my plant nursery in South Florida. After 7 days of laying in bed, dying, what happened to me on July 5th, 1984, at exactly 12 midnight. Please read my testimony. And check out everything on my website, please. It's very important. My website's mostly spiritual.
Okay.
Okay, well,
thank you.
I will point.
And I think there would be aided in that.
Okay.
Another thing I'd like to mention to you, Mike, about the ancient prophets. Not everybody in the ancient times.
Greg, I really don't want to get off into ancient prophecies, and and I understand you're a very spiritual person. But we're coming to the end of the show. We've got another caller waiting on the line, and we got a lot of stuff to get to. So thank you for the information. I will direct Claire to your website and that other page of translated holy books. And thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Mark in Georgia. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Leviticus 25. It's called a Jubilee.
Yes.
And we need to pound on our so-called representatives that when the government, you can see this on the, I do not consent to Admiralty jurisdiction. John Satmiller put my notice there. When a system of government, instead of prosecuting fraud, is party to it and profits from it, when Congress votes themselves pay raises and enacts legislation that exempts themselves, that's not a republic. A republic means the rule of law. And that's the thing that Barry Loudermilk, who's my Congress critter, who claims to be there to represent you, represent me among other people in this district. And he says, well, a republic means you vote for people who represent you. It's like, that's a very simplistic and woefully inadequate definition of the term republic. It means the rule of law, and it requires that people be informed. Why don't you read Plato's Republic? And the thing I'm trying to get across to people, part of Plato's Republic was a thing called the analogy of the cave, where these people saw these shadows, and they thought the shadows were the reality. But somebody managed to escape, and he saw what the shadows were manifestations of, and he basically says the bottom line is those that see past the shadows and lies of their culture will never be understood, much less believed by the masses. And that's what I'm up against, is trying to explain to people, if you're one of the most of the people that just don't get it, you're so wrapped up in political theatrics that what's gone down the Orwellian memory hole is the real issue. The real issue is that criminals have hijacked our government, and both sides say, you mean them over there? And I'm like, you're looking at the wrong end of the puppet string, friends and neighbors. Look at the other end of the puppet string. Let me control the nation's money supply. I care not who writes its laws. And when you cited 1 Timothy 6, verse 10, I looked it up, and I'll get the exact Greek word. It literally means the love of silver. But you're correct. It is the love of money that is the root of all kinds of evil, not money itself. Money can be used to do good. It can be used to do evil. And the problem is that this system, Mayor Rothschild technically was right, but morally completely wrong. And that said, technically he can get his way all the time by controlling the issuance of currency, but how they use it is not moral. And that's the problem.
I
guess we're on the same page there.
Yeah, we definitely
are. Coming up on the end of the show. And so I do appreciate it. And, like I say, you sound a lot more moral than a lot of people later this month. Today's the first day of March. So I'm contemplating about going to a Kufi meeting, just trying to get some contact. Hey, would you like to join my email list? And Then they find out afterwards that I'm basically there to completely rebut a lot of the Scofieldian eschatology and say, this is not the biblical Israel. You're not blessing anyone. Where did you people learn, get the idea in your head that basically it's in the book of Hebrews, if you're not disciplined, you're a bastard. And that's why I say the modern political entity called Israel is a bastard. Because, reaping the consequences of your own sins is not discipline. If you wake up with a hangover because you had a fender, I don't mean you personally. I mean, if somebody gets wasted and they get a hangover, that's not discipline. And when I talk about giving this arrogant bastard a spanking, it gets twisted into you're saying that all these people should be killed. I'm saying that impunity brings out the worst in people, and that's why we have a problem.
Yes.
And my biggest problem with Zionism is they refuse to engage in an honest debate. They refuse to debate, well, here's the narrative you've been told, but you've only heard one side, and anyone who disagrees with that one side, you call us an anti-Semite, or, well, those are self-hating Jews, and I'm like, no, they're not. And besides that, Arabs are Semitic. So anyway, you're a blessing, and I'm praying that, I understand your misgivings about you had questions and, way back, and nobody gave you the kind of mentorship, and they should have gotten you in touch with a seminary. They should have gotten you in touch with somebody who could answer
Okay.
your questions.
Don't want to go down that. Don't want to go down
with that for now.
Okay.
Well, I'm just saying I'd like to reboot if you're willing to reconsider it and say yes, you have legitimate questions, and those questions should have been handled properly instead of saying, well, you're invited to leave because we don't want to deal with somebody who's getting so dang Socratic on us. And that's what I want to tell these people. I want to get Socratic with you people, for those of you that have an open mind.
Yeah.
And they basically sentenced Socrates to death for his annoying habit of asking probing and challenging questions.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Have a good day.
All right.
All right.
You
Well, listen,
take
Mark,
care.
thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and we're going to go ahead and close the phone lines for the rest of the show because Claire's got a lot of stuff to talk about. But before we do that, I do want to make a quick comment here on, I think it was yesterday's radio show. We were talking, about some science story, and I was talking about evolution and self-replicating molecules, and I got an email from somebody saying, no, the truth is, in the Bible, and that prompted me to make an on-air comment about the idea that people who absolutely believe that the Bible is the literal truth are taking the position that a bunch of Bronze Age goat herders got it all right, and all of modern science is completely wrong regarding the origins of this planet and life. And that got me another email saying Solomon was the wisest man on planet Earth in all of time. Maybe he was. We don't really know. There isn't much that survives about him. But no matter how wise he was, he didn't have access to chemistry. He didn't have access to microscopes. He didn't have access to electricity. Mm-hmm. He didn't have access to sonar. He didn't have access to any of the modern instrumentality which allows us to explore the reality around us. And religion is a set of beliefs. And if you look at all the different religions all around the world, they all have different beliefs, and they all think they're the only one true religion. But have you ever noticed how religious belief stops at national borders? And so that tells you it's not really a universal. And I know I'm offending a lot of Christians out there, and I'm sorry if your feelings are really very hurt. But the reason I stopped being a Christian was very simple. When I was in that congregational church back in New Hampshire singing in the choir, they gave me my own Bible, and that was their downfall because I read it. And I started asking questions, and the answers I got didn't make any sense at all. And it reached the point where the Sunday school teacher literally called my parents and said, he doesn't need to come anymore.
Poor baby.
Yeah, poor baby. So
Yeah.
I had much more time on Sundays to do things like make telescopes and,
Yes.
Fire off water rockets and things like that, so it worked out well for me. All right, so what is you want to talk about now?
I want to talk Could you turn now?
Oh,
Thank
okay,
you.
yes.
I wanted to talk about an article from antiwar.com. And folks, if you have not seen this, it's a very intelligently fact-centric blog. And, but this particular article, no. And this is originally from Deutsche Welle, the German international blog. And it seems like NATO has got itself into the Black Sea. And the background to this incident is what happened in the Kerch Strait at the end of November. Now, Russian ships off the coast of the Crimean Peninsula, and then they used the words, which was annexed from Ukraine by Russia in 2014, seized 2 Ukrainian Navy boats and a tug. And Deborah Sanders of the King's College London told Deutsche Welle that Europe had reacted quite slowly to the incident in the Strait. And so a more military approach was chosen, meaning an increased naval presence. And they go down and they used the word annexed again when it came to Crimea.
Yes, that's the official lie, and if you're a patriotic American, you will believe it.
Deutsche Welle, you just lost your credibility and my respect with this piece of codswallop. And I have to ask if their English language editors are so brazenly stupid, and I use that word deliberately, I don't use it often, that they would deliberately blink and miss one of the most important stories of 2015.
Well, they want to keep their jobs.
Yeah.
Is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the deep state in this country and the rest of the world, you know, the media has been brought under complete control by governments.
Except the independent media.
Except the independent media.
People like us.
The corporate media is now totally under the control, not just of the corporations that own it, but the government itself. And their job is to sell you things, not to inform you, not to teach you anything, to sell you things. Their job is to sell you that Russia annexed Crimea, which was not happening. Their job was to say you that Assad was gassing his own people, even though it made absolutely no sense for him to do so. Their job was to sell you the idea that Saddam had nuclear weapons and could attack Great Britain with only 45 minutes notice. That's what the corporate media is all about.
And this gets me so angry because President Obama admitted in front of God and everybody in a 2015 interview with CNN that the U.S. had brokered the deal to get Yanukovych, the duly elected Ukrainian president, run over by the proverbial bus, leaving the door open in Kiev for Poroshenko to enter.
And who was it who said that they only had to spend $5 billion to get that to happen? That was Victoria Nuland.
Nuland, yeah, right. And so it was the U.S. that was behind this, and yet the rest of this is how the Crimean people handled it. And I thought it was beautiful and a real exercise in self-government. 2 steps were taken. One, the Crimean people were given an option, a referendum as to whether post-putsch they wanted to stay with Ukraine or petition the Russian Federation to join. And overwhelmingly, the Crimean people said, yeah, we'd like to join the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation was accepting of this, and that's how it became, you know, part of Russia.
Well, you see, the United States refuses to recognize the right of the Crimean people to hold a referendum, even though it is guaranteed under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the logic behind this is like a guest at a wedding refusing to recognize the bride's right to choose that particular groom. Therefore, by default, the groom has kidnapped and raped the bride.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing. We refuse to recognize the right of the Crimean people to join with Russia. Therefore, by default, Russia stole Crimea.
Yeah.
And they're just going to keep on repeating it in the hope that eventually you'll get tired of trying to tell the truth and say, oh, all right, Russia.
I won't.
Russia stole Crimea. Go ahead and bomb them. They'll bomb us. It'll all be over, and I won't have to listen to the government anymore.
You know, but I think it's not going to happen, or it will happen when pigs discover they are aerodynamic. I think Deutsche Welle owes their readers an apology.
They'll
not going to happen. I'd like to move now quickly. The UN Council has said that Israel is intentionally shooting children and journalists in Gaza. And officials are saying the killings are part of Israel's obligation. Well, Israel is usually furious at the UN Human Rights Council most of the time, but they are particularly furious right now whenever the body offers a report, as Israel tends to violate a whole lot of human rights.
With U.S. backing.
Yeah, and in this case, the Council has announced an independent inquiry into the protests at the Gaza border. Now, as most of you know who've been reading or listening what really happened, every Friday for months now, Palestinian protesters have rallied near the Gaza border to protest the Israeli blockade. And every Friday, like clockwork, Israel shoots a large number of people. The investigation ruled that there are reasonable grounds to believe that Israel has violated international law with this.
Okay, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program on this Pauhana Friday. And we're talking about the UN coming on out with their report, which has been seconded by a European human rights organization as well, that Israel has probably committed war crimes and crimes against humanity with their constant shooting of unarmed protesters who are protesting the Great March of Return, which, by the way, is about to hit its 1-year anniversary.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the report noted that 154 out of the 183 people killed by Israel in that time were entirely unarmed. They noted that Israel had repeatedly, deliberately shot children and journalists, as well as disabled protesters. International law, needless to say, frowns on those sorts of deliberate killings.
Not to mention those butterfly bullets.
Oh. And my thought is, why, in the name of heaven, what motivates heavily armed IDF members to assassinate Palestinian kids? And where is doing this protects the citizens of Israel? And Mike, the only understanding I can come to is that realizing that in maiming and killing Palestinian kids and assassinating Palestinian kids, the IDF is taking away as much of the Palestinian future away from their families as they can. I think
that's
it's just
exactly
that
it.
simple.
Yeah, you know, when you kill the children, you know, the parents are devastated.
Yeah.
And the reason they're shooting at these protesters like this is because the world is watching.
Yeah.
And as we reported earlier, we're starting to see more and more organizations pull away from Israel and say it's time to look at what's going on in Palestine.
Yeah.
And Israel doesn't want that to happen. Because, first of all, when the world really takes a look at what's going on in Palestine, they're going to be shocked.
Yeah.
And they're going to say to Israel, why have you been doing this? And Israel doesn't really have a reply other than we wanted to.
Yeah.
And so it's gone on for way too long. And I'm glad that so many people are standing up to all of this. I applaud that Arkansas newspaper that is actually suing against that requirement by the state to sign literally a loyalty oath to a foreign power in order to do business with their own state government.
That gets weird for me. It really does.
We've got laws like that in 26 of these states where these state legislators are literally subservient to a foreign government. And we're an occupied nation. We have puppet rulers over us who rule us in the name of a foreign power, and we don't like it. We shouldn't like it. Other nations don't like it. The Iraqis didn't like it. The Afghani didn't like it. And we should be very angry about it. And I'm hoping at some point there's going to be a flashpoint where Americans stand up and say, look, if you're not going to run this country for the American people, get out of the government.
Amen.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. There's the music. It's time for us to get on out of here. Get something useful done with the rest of the weekend. So have a really good weekend. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know, and please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. And by the way, thank you for all those who have donated. It really helps right now.
Oh,
Things
yes.
are very, very tight this month. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.